Jesus and his views on war are obviously a very ponderous subject. At this point in time, it's very, very relevant because not only do we have a avowedly Christian president who, by the way, just vetoed the massive spending bill, war spending bill, which would reduce the war in Iraq. And you have the Christian right very strongly backing President Bush's war theme. And so you have essentially Christianity now joining with a warring empire, which the United States has become. So the question is, what would Jesus have thought about all that? Historians document that up until the 3rd century, when Christianity became institutionalized and became part of the warring Roman Empire, before that time, Christian scholars and Christian leaders taught that Christians couldn't go to war. In fact, Tertullian, who was one of the early giants in the Christian church, lived in the later 2nd century, taught very clearly that if Christians were in the military, they would have to lay down their arms and suffer and become martyrs rather than suffer violence. So it was very, very clear that Christians up until the 3rd century didn't even consider that they could be in the army and fight or go to war or to inflict violence on any kind. Jesus' own actions were clearly taught that violence was never justified. When he was arrested in the garden, Peter pulled a sword, and Jesus told him to put it away. He says, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. So he who lives by violence dies by violence. So Jesus taught clearly that violence was never justified. Jesus going to the cross and not resisting at all and most biblical scholars agree that this was the ultimate statement against any type of violence. The ideal Christ was setting there for Christians to follow and for all mankind was that it's better to suffer violence, torture, than to inflict violence. And so the basic principle that Christ taught was that love is eternal. Love is the only way to overcome violence, and we should practice love. But involved in all that is the fact that at certain points you're going to have to suffer torture, you're going to have to suffer pain and maybe death to live out those principles. So Jesus in war, Jesus would have been opposed to war. Modern saints, if we want to call them that, people such as Martin Luther King, when he opposed the Vietnam War, he stood on the principles of Jesus and says you cannot, as a Christian, be involved in war. And the thing that King taught, and I thought was very, very, very key, and it was based on the principles of Jesus, was that active peacemaking is the way to end war. And I would challenge people to think about this. If the Christian church would never have become part of the Roman Empire and become part of the warring Roman Empire from the time of Jesus on up to the present day, if every church that claims to be a Christian church would have taught nonviolence and would stood strongly against war, where would we be today? Well, we would probably have much less war. We probably wouldn't have had the monsters that arose in history that inflicted all kinds of war. And we couldn't be justifying war in any way. So what am I saying is that we've never really consistently practiced it at all as a Christian church. We have Christian leaders such as Jerry Falwell saying that we need to blow away our enemies in the name of the Lord. As far as Christians of the early church, that would have been abhorrent for anyone to believe such a thing. So we've not only have we gotten so far away from the principles of Christ, we've never really practiced them. So let me say it again. If every church in the United States today, in Australia, any of the Western countries would actually practice active peacemaking against war, we would probably end war in the world. So really it's up to the Christian church to do that.